Hi, my name is Katie Pugh, and I have Erik Erikson as a psychologist. He developed the 8 stages of psychosocial development. He was born June 15, 1902 in Frankfurt, Germany, where he was abandoned by his father at birth, but not his mother. His mother would later remarry his stepfather, Dr. Theodor Homenberg. And he would actually take his name up until 1939 when he would change it to Erik Erikson. Through school, he never really liked science and your regular studies. Instead, he liked the arts. So he actually studied art, and after high school, he went on to become an artist. A little bit about his family life. He married Joanne Severson in 1930. They had 3 children. Their firstborn, Neil, had developmental and mental disabilities, some physical also, so he was institutionalized actually by his father, Erik Erikson. They had a middle child named Kai, who's a sociologist, and their oldest daughter, Sue, who is best known for the book she wrote called In the Shadow of Fame. Interesting fact about Erik Erikson is he converted from Judaism to Christianity, which comes to his move from Germany to Boston. So during the Nazi uprising, Erikson and his family fled to the United States, taking up residency in Boston, where he will be known as the first male to practice child psychoanalysis in Boston area. He worked for Harvard Medical School, Judge Baker Guidance Center, and Harvard's Psychological Clinic. Later, he would work at Yale's Institute in Human Relations and be a professor at Yale School of Medicine. So he kind of transitioned a lot. During this time, he worked with a variety of children and observed them in play. He also took a preference in studying the local Indian tribes in the area, so that was his main study. In 1939, he moved to California with his family and worked at the Institute of Child Welfare. He also worked at the University of California, Berkeley, and San Francisco. He worked also closely with Native American tribes there. His work suggested that he take a non-communist oath, which he refused, stating that he wasn't communist. So instead of signing an oath, he lost his job and they moved back to Massachusetts, where he would continue his study and also spend the rest of his life. Erik Erikson passed away in 1994. He contributed, however, a lot to psychology. He really expanded from Freud's theory of the 5 stages, and he was actually Anne Freud's patient at one point. However, there are some differences between Freud's stage and Erikson's stages. Erikson focused a lot on biology and emotional disorders and how society influenced our normal development throughout our lifespan. Erikson has 8 stages of his psychosocial development. Stage 1 is trust versus mistrust. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame or doubt. 3 is initiative versus guilt. 4 is industry versus inferiority. 5, identity versus and reputation versus identity diffusion. 6 is intimacy and solidarity versus isolation. 7 is generative versus self-absorption. And 8 is integrative versus despair. Sorry. So stage 1 is trust versus mistrust. This begins in infancy to 18 months. They must learn to trust. Erikson believed that this was left up to the parents or guardians of the child to meet the child's basic needs, such as feeding, nurturing, loving, hygiene care. So I left an example that says babies cry because they are hungry and want to be held. By providing that need, they learn to trust. So babies who aren't nurtured will seem to experience more mistrust in individuals rather than trust. This is just one example. There are many others that you could give. So once they achieve the trust or mistrust stage, we move on to the second stage, which is autonomy versus shame or doubt. This occurs during 18 months to 3 years of age, and this is where they should complete their basic needs independently, from feeding to dressing to grooming. Potty training usually occurs in this stage. A child does not learn to feed his or herself and watches others. So if they're unable to do what their peers do, they're more than likely to feel that doubt or shame, to where if they do reach their basic needs and learn those usual functions, they will feel more part of the group and feel like they are doing what they should be, and they're more likely to reach that sense of self. So once they reach stage 2, of course, we move to stage 3, which is initiative versus guilt. This happens between the ages of 3 and 5. Learning new concepts. At this age, they're starting to go to school and they're starting to see different things, interacting with more children. So in the picture, I put, it's a little boy. He's separating his colors, green, red, yellow, blue. He should be able, by this time, to sort the colors properly. So he learns this new task, and he continues to do it, and one day he kind of forgets, asks for help. This is where Erikson says that he may feel guilty asking because the child feels like they should understand it already. So once they reach that task where they initiate an activity, they can move to stage 4. Stage 4 is industry versus inferiority. It occurs between 5 to 13 years old. Maturity and self-awareness increases, and so does competitiveness. Understand reasoning and subjects taught at school. So sports is an excellent example. Kids want to win those trophies or that title. We tend to see more competition, even in academics. And I put a picture of 2 boys arm wrestling because I felt like that was a good example of competitiveness. Stage 5 is identity versus role confusion. This occurs between 13 to 21 years of age. They find and are forming sexual identity, and this is also where Erikson believes identity crisis occurs, which is the transition between adolescence to adulthood. So we are getting out of high school and trying to figure out what we're going to do with life. He feels like this is a very vital moment in the stages, and we have a lot of life-changing choices to make. So once we reach this stage, we move into stage 6, which is more of intimacy versus isolation. It occurs between 21 to 39 years old. You have increased socialization, either because you're entering the workforce, or you're going to college, or you're meeting that significant other, which is vital in this part, Erikson believes. Finding a lifelong partner or not. An example, of course, being dating. You know, you go out and you wonder if this is going to be the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, or if you choose not to have a partner, you will choose the more isolation choice, or more socialization with other people and groups. Once you reach this stage, you move to stage 7, which is generativity versus stagnation. This occurs between 40 to 65 years old, and this is where individuals are getting closer to the end of work and more towards retirement. They're looking more at wanting to form a legacy. Also at this age, we're starting to see your children grow up, and then you have grandchildren, so you're wanting to leave a lot of good memories and things for them to be proud of, because you're getting closer to the end of life, and you want to make sure that you feel as productive as possible before you retire, which enters us into stage 8. This is the final stage. This is the ego, integrity versus despair. This is 65 and up. This is where you find your sense of fulfillment. This is a reflection part of your life. You have the older generation or your grandparents. They start talking about what it was like to be young, and they start reflecting on the good times. The ones who do not do well during this time is people who don't feel like they have fulfilled their life, or feel like they failed, or they don't feel like they have very good memories. So that is the final stage. We're going to look at now how each stage kind of influences one another. So Erikson believed you had to achieve one stage at a time, because he believed it made a healthier personality and a sense of self. If someone is unable to reach a stage, they may not be able to move to the next one or achieve a healthier personality. He saw the ego as a positive driving force in human development and personality. He really pushed on the idea of the ego, which is mentioned also in Freud's stages. However, his theory differs a lot from Freud's stages. Development through the resolution of conflict between two opposing forces. This is where your environment and your personal life kind of collide. He focused on play during his observation with children, and his was more of a lifelong process, starting from birth to death. His contributions just in his study methods, he contributed to direct observation and cultural comparison. His research and theory expanded psychoanalytical theory. Criticisms that they had was it was hard for his findings to be put into more of an abstract thought. He had a hard time controlling his experiments, and his name of his stages were not the usual meaning of the stages. Also, there was a lot of questions left, like how does a child achieve a stage, and if the child is not reaching a certain stage, how can you kind of help that? So say a child doesn't feed themselves, but they're achieving everything else, and they're even moving on to the next stage. How does that child stay in one stage if he's halfway in between? There was a lot of questions on how to fully understand the step-by-step stage. Growth with the stages. However, many researchers have taken Erikson's studies and the 8 stages and grown tremendously on them. A lot of the ideas that have grown is in the older adult and the young adult ages. It has been found that adults that find their purpose in life tend to live longer than those who don't. So that very last stage, in stage 8, the ones who feel like they have fulfilled their life and, reflect well on their memories, they do tend to live longer than those who reach the despair. A lot of times we hear about the older generation becoming depressed. Another thing is emerging into adulthood. This new phase was added to the lifespan due to higher attendance of college, delay of children or marriage, and enter into full-time employment. This falls between the adolescence and young adult stage. James Makara, I probably pronounced that wrong, theory of identity achievements. He expanded on the adolescent stage of Erikson's theory. He focuses and argues crisis and commitment form an adolescent's identity. So that's a very interesting concept. A crisis is classified as time of adolescence to rethink things that they have not always known and learn. From here, they will decide to carry a value throughout life or not. So, two terms that come from James was identity diffusion and identity foreclosure. Identity diffusion does not feel as though they have a choice, and identity foreclosure is willing to commit to a role or value. So at this point, as a high schooler going into adulthood, they have to choose, do they want to be like their parents? Do they want to keep religious values? Or do they want to venture out on their own, try something new? When you graduate high school, they always say that there's a big wide open world out there. So he kind of grew on that and made that stage a little lengthier. Also, we are seeing, and it's written on here, that couples are having children later on in life, so that intimacy role kind of goes further into the age than what Erikson originally had planned out. These are my references, and it's very interesting how all of his 8 stages really pan out